Welcome to the Pencil Bob channel. I hope you enjoy my stories. Please like and subscribe, and hit that notification icon so you never miss out. Now on with the stories.
I never thought I'd see Doug's face again after the mess he made of our neighborhood, but there he was, standing in my office looking for a job. The nerve of that guy. It all started about 5 years ago when I moved into Sunnyside Estates, a quiet suburban neighborhood with manicured lawns and cookie-cutter houses. At first, everything seemed perfect. The streets were clean, the community pool was well maintained, and there were regular block parties where neighbors mingled over potluck dishes and cold beers. But beneath the surface, trouble was brewing. Our homeowners association, led by the infamous Doug Peterson, was slowly running the neighborhood into the ground. I remember the day I met Doug. It was at my first HOA meeting, held in the stuffy community center on a sweltering summer evening. Doug stood at the front of the room, his portly frame squeezed into an ill-fitting suit, addressing the crowd with an air of self-importance. "Welcome, everyone," he boomed, his voice grating on my nerves. "As your HOA president, I'm here to ensure Sunnyside Estates remains the premier neighborhood in the county." I glanced around the room, noticing the mix of bored and annoyed expressions on my neighbors' faces. Clearly, I wasn't the only one who found Doug insufferable. As the meeting dragged on, Doug droned about trivial matters like the proper shade of beige for exterior paint and the acceptable height for garden gnomes. I found myself zoning out, wondering why I had bothered to attend in the first place. It wasn't until a few months later that I realized just how badly Doug was mismanaging our HOA funds. The first red flag came when our community pool, usually open from Memorial Day to Labor Day, remained closed well into June. "What's going on with the pool?" I asked my neighbor Susie, as we chatted over the fence one afternoon. Susie rolled her eyes. "Apparently, there's no money in the budget for the necessary repairs and maintenance. Doug claims we need to raise HOA fees to cover the costs." I frowned. "But didn't we just have an increase last year?" "Yep," Susie nodded. "And the year before that. Something fishy is going on, if you ask me." That conversation sparked my curiosity, and I began paying closer attention to the HOA's financial reports. What I discovered was shocking. Under Doug's leadership, our once healthy reserve fund had dwindled to almost nothing. Money was being spent on unnecessary improvements like gold-plated street signs and an elaborate water feature at the neighborhood entrance. Meanwhile, essential maintenance was being neglected. The playground equipment was rusting, the tennis courts were cracking, and the state of our roads, that's a whole other story. I decided to speak up at the next HOA meeting. "Doug," I said, standing up and addressing him directly, "can you explain why we're spending money on frivolous projects when our basic infrastructure is falling apart?" Doug's face turned red and he sputtered. Now, let's not get carried away. These improvements are necessary to maintain our property values." "But what about the pool?" another neighbor chimed in. It was Lisa from 2 streets over, a mother of 3 young kids. "My children have been asking all summer when it's going to open. They're going stir-crazy without it, and I'm running out of excuses." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Tom, the retired teacher from Oak Lane, stood up. "Yeah, Doug. My grandkids were supposed to visit for their annual swimming week. Now they're not coming because there's no pool. What's the holdup?" Doug's face reddened slightly as he waved his hand dismissively. "We're working on it. These things take time. There are complications." "What kind of complications?" Karen pressed, her voice tinged with frustration. "It's just a pool. We've never had issues before." "Well," Doug stammered, "there are regulations to consider and, safety protocols to update." Tammy, my next-door neighbor, leaned over and whispered, "Safety protocols since when? The pool was fine last year." I shrugged, equally confused by Doug's vague explanations. "Look," Doug said, raising his voice to address the whole room, "I assure you we're doing everything we can to get the pool open as soon as possible. In the meantime, why don't we discuss the exciting new gold-plated street signs I've been considering?" The room erupted in groans and protests, but Doug pressed on, clearly eager to change the subject. As the meeting devolved into chaos, with angry residents shouting questions and demands, I realized something needed to be done. I couldn't stand by and watch Doug run our neighborhood into the ground any longer. Over the next few months, I rallied a group of like-minded neighbors. We pored over financial records, uncovering more and more evidence of Doug's mismanagement and possible embezzlement. We attended every HOA meeting, challenging Doug's decisions and demanding transparency. It wasn't easy. Doug had his supporters, mostly older residents who were set in their ways and resistant to change. He tried to paint us as troublemakers, even going so far as to send out a community-wide email accusing us of spreading fake news about the HOA's finances. But we persisted. We went door to door, talking to our neighbors and gathering signatures for a petition to remove Doug from the board. It was exhausting work, but with each new signature I felt a sense of hope growing. The turning point came when we discovered Doug had used HOA funds to pay for a lavish family vacation to Hawaii. It was Lisa who first noticed the discrepancy in the financial reports, her brow furrowing as she pointed out a sizable withdrawal labeled vaguely as community outreach expenses. As we dug deeper, the truth became undeniable. Doug had taken our hard-earned dues to fund a week-long stay at a 5-star resort, complete with first-class flights for his entire family. We gathered our evidence, compiling bank statements and receipts, and called for an emergency board meeting. The atmosphere was tense as we presented our findings, projecting the damning documents on the screen for everyone to see. Doug sat at the front, visibly sweating, trying to stammer out excuses. It was a necessary trip for community improvements, he blurted. But the room erupted in disbelief. Even his staunchest supporters, like Marge Wilson, exchanged glances of shock and dismay. It was clear. Doug's blatant misuse of funds could no longer be ignored. The tide had turned, and we were ready to take action. I'll never forget the look on Doug's face as he was voted out of office. His usual bluster was gone, replaced by a mix of anger and defeat. As he stormed out of the meeting, he pointed at me and snarled, "You'll regret this, mark my words." In the aftermath of Doug's removal, we elected a new board and got to work repairing the damage he had done. It took time, but slowly things started to improve. The pool reopened, the playground was repaired, and we even managed to repave some of the worst roads without raising HOA fees. Life in Sunnyside Estates returned to normal, and Doug faded from our collective memory. Or so I thought. Fast forward to last week. I was sitting in my office at work reviewing some reports when my assistant buzzed me on the intercom. "There's a Doug Peterson here to see you about the open accounting position," she said. I froze, my hand hovering over the mouse. Surely it couldn't be the same Doug. But as I peered through the glass partition separating my office from the reception area, I saw him. Older, grayer, and considerably less cocky, but unmistakably the same Doug who had nearly ruined our neighborhood. Taking a deep breath, I told my assistant to send him in. As Doug entered my office, I noticed he had lost weight, and his once crisp suit hung loosely on his frame. He extended his hand, a nervous smile on his face. "Mr. Johnson," he said, "thank you for seeing me. I'm here about the accounting position." I didn't shake his hand. Instead, I leaned back in my chair, studying him. "Have a seat, Doug," I said, gesturing to the chair across from my desk. He sat down, fidgeting with his tie. "I'm not sure if you remember me, but—" "Oh, I remember you, Doug," I cut him off. "How could I forget the man who nearly bankrupted our HOA?" Doug's face fell, and he had the decency to look ashamed. "Ah, I see. Well, I was hoping that was all in the past. I've learned from my mistakes, and I'm looking for a fresh start." I couldn't believe the audacity of this guy. After everything he had done, he expected me to just forget about it and give him a job. "A fresh start?" I repeated, my voice rising. "Do you have any idea of the damage you caused? The stress you put our entire neighborhood through?" Doug shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "I know I made some poor decisions, but poor decisions," I laughed bitterly. "That's an understatement. You embezzled funds, neglected essential maintenance, and treated the HOA like your personal piggy bank." "I've paid for my mistakes," Doug protested weakly. "I lost my job, my reputation, and whose fault is that?" I shot back. "You're lucky you didn't end up in jail." We sat in silence for a moment, the tension in the room thick enough to cut with a knife. I could see the desperation in Doug's eyes, and for a brief moment I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. "Look," Doug said, leaning forward, "I know I messed up, but I'm a changed man. I've taken courses in financial management. I've volunteered with local charities. I'm trying to make amends." I shook my head. "That's great, Doug. I'm glad you're trying to turn your life around. But did you really think coming here was a good idea? Did you think I'd just forget everything that happened?" Doug's shoulders slumped. I don't know what I hoped. I just need a job, and I saw the opening here. I thought maybe enough time had passed." "Well, you thought wrong," I said firmly. "I'm sorry, but there's no way I can hire you. The position requires trust and integrity, 2 things you've proven you lack." Doug stood up slowly, defeat written all over his face. "I understand. I'm sorry for wasting your time." As he turned to leave, a part of me wanted to say something encouraging, to offer some words of advice or support, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. The memory of all the stress and anger he had caused was still too fresh. "Goodbye, Doug," I said simply. He paused at the door, looking back at me. "For what it's worth, I truly am sorry for everything I did. I hope someday you can forgive me." With that he was gone, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I sat there for a long time replaying our conversation in my head. Part of me felt guilty for being so harsh, but another part felt justified. Actions have consequences, and Doug was finally facing his. As I drove home that evening, I couldn't shake the image of Doug's defeated expression. It was a far cry from the arrogant, self-important man who had ruled our HOA with an iron fist. I wondered what had happened to him in the years since his ousting. Had he really changed, or was this just another act? When I arrived home, I saw my neighbor Susie out watering her flowers. I waved and walked over to chat. "You'll never guess who came looking for a job at my office today," I said. Susie raised an eyebrow. "Who?" "Doug Peterson." Her jaw dropped. "No way, what did you do?" I recounted the conversation, and Susie listened intently, shaking her head in disbelief. "Can you believe the nerve of that guy?" I finished. Susie was quiet for a moment, then said, "You know, part of me feels bad for him. He really did a number on himself." I nodded reluctantly. "I know, but after everything he put us through, I just couldn't bring myself to help him." "I don't blame you," Susie said. "Actions have consequences. He made his bed, now he has to lie in it." As I headed inside, I couldn't help but reflect on how one person's poor decisions could have such far-reaching effects. Doug's mismanagement had impacted an entire community, and now, years later, he was still dealing with the fallout. That night, as I lay in bed, I found myself wondering about forgiveness and second chances. Had I done the right thing by turning Doug away so harshly, or should I have shown more compassion? I didn't have any easy answers. All I knew was that the next HOA meeting was coming up, and thanks to the hard work of our new board, we had a healthy reserve fund, well-maintained facilities, and a community that was thriving once again. As I drifted off to sleep, I made a mental note to appreciate the peace and stability we now enjoyed in Sunnyside Estates. It had been hard-won, and I was determined never to take it for granted again. In the end, Doug's visit served as a reminder of how far we'd come and how important it was to stay vigilant. Our community had learned a valuable lesson about the importance of engaged residents and responsible leadership. And while I couldn't give Doug the fresh start he was looking for, I hoped he would find a way to make amends and rebuild his life, far away from any positions of financial responsibility. As for me, I was grateful for the role I had played in turning things around. It hadn't been easy, but standing up to Doug and fighting for our neighborhood had been worth it. Sunnyside Estates was our home, and now, finally, it felt like the peaceful, welcoming community we had all hoped for when we first moved in. Typical HOA bullshit. These power-hungry jerks always find a way to screw over hard-working homeowners. Doug sounds like a real piece of work, but let's be real. Most HOA presidents are just as bad. They're all on some kind of ego trip, thinking they can control every little thing about our homes. I bet half the people in that neighborhood didn't even know what was going on until it was too late. HOAs should be illegal, period. Okay, so this guy Doug is obviously a total jerk, but am I the only one who thinks the narrator is kinda harsh? I mean, yeah, Doug messed up big time, but people can change, right? Maybe he really did learn his lesson and needed a job. I don't know, it just seems mean to not even give him a chance. Plus, the whole story is just from one person's view, so who knows if it's even all true. HOAs suck anyway. Why do people even join them? It's just asking for trouble, if you ask me. The whole system is messed up and gives too much power to random people who probably don't know what they're doing half the time. I can't believe people still fall for the HOA trap in this day and age. It's like voluntarily signing up to have your life micromanaged by your neighbors. This story is just one of countless examples of HOA corruption and mismanagement. The fact that Doug was able to embezzle funds and waste money on useless improvements for so long shows how broken the system is. And let's not forget, even after they got rid of him, they still have an HOA. So what's stopping the next president from pulling the same crap? The whole concept is flawed from the start. You're basically giving a bunch of random people control over your property and your wallet. No thanks. I'll take my chances with a regular neighborhood any day. At least then I can paint my house whatever color I want without getting a fine or having to attend mind-numbing meetings about garden gnomes.
I would like to thank you for watching the video to the end. To encourage us to make more videos, please like, subscribe, comment, as well as share. Check out this other video if you haven't already.